Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. It's titled Kids in Quarantine, Advice from Parents. I'm Mark Raven from KaiNexus. I'm going to be host and moderator today. And we're joined with three panelists. We'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more as we go. We have Webb Cyphert, we have Sara Evans, and some of you might recognize from KaiNexus, we have Jeff Roussel. So Sara, maybe let you go first and just share a little bit about yourself and your family.
Sure. So prior to being a mom, I was a strategy consultant for a number of years. And now I have an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old. Last year, as it happens, we homeschooled for 3 months while we were traveling internationally. So I have a little bit of experience being learning the ropes of homeschooling, I guess. But this is bringing it all back to me.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie. My undergrad is in special education, which I taught for several years. Then I spent a few years in financial services, insurance, and investments. And for the last 8 years, I have been teaching 8th grade science. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old at home. So we are all adapting to this new normal.
Yeah, great. And thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, so I'm Jeff Roussel. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at KaiNexus, although that shouldn't really matter for this webinar. For this webinar, I am a step parent of 3 awesome step kids. I have boy-girl twins that are 16 and a half, and then I have a little girl that is about to turn 14 in a week. My wife and I both work full-time. Luckily, we're able to do that at home, but as everyone that can work from home knows, that poses some interesting challenges too. So really looking forward to going through this conversation today.
Well, thanks. And again, thanks to all of you, and thanks to the people who've signed in live. We do have some prepared questions to get the ball rolling, but we would invite you, if you have a question that you want to ask, use the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And one other comment, just in terms of topics, we did have a few questions that came in that are a little bit more medical in nature. And for those, I would refer people to the previous webinars that we've done in this KaiNexus series with 1 or 2 doctors answering a lot of those questions. We will follow up with a link to those webinars, and our blog also has some written Q&A that might be helpful for people. So in this, we have a first background visitor.
I thought it was going to be my kids. I thought it was my husband.
Yeah, that's right, guest appearance. So first question for any or all of you, how are you teaching your kids about social distancing and practicing that, or physical distancing, if you will?
So I can chime in there. For our family, my feeling is that particularly for the kids in my age group, a simple rule is the easiest rule. And we have just decided as a family that we're not going to have any interaction with the outside world. We're fortunate to be able to do that, but that way there isn't ambiguity about, oh, maybe I could have only the kids that live on my street come over to play, or maybe only we could play at the pool, or like those sort of ambiguities are easily resolved when the rule is we're not interacting with anyone other than the 5 people in our family.
We are going out some for walks and things like that, but I have been very upfront with my kids throughout this over the last few weeks in terms of we're staying 6+ feet apart. You are not to go inside anywhere. We're not interacting with anyone outside the immediate family, including they have cousins here in town. My parents are here in town. For my students, I actually posted a Mythbusters video that's circulating on Facebook, Instagram, that sort of thing. It's from season 8, where they simulated someone having a cold and having a dinner party. And this clear liquid actually fluoresces under black light. So if you can find the clip out there on YouTube, it shows in 5 or 6 minutes just how easily germs are spread. And I found that was really effective for some of my students.
Great. Thank
cool.
you
Yeah,
for sharing that. Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, it's been a blend of teaching and rules for us. So, I have teenagers, as I mentioned, and they push back and they reason very effectively, and I want them to, right? I want them to think for themselves, and they may or may not have the kind of social discipline or the understanding of, like, doing this now may not affect them at all, but it's going to affect other people and it's going to affect our healthcare system. And, at some point their resolve gets low and they may or may not care. So I've certainly had to have rules that said, sorry, even if you don't like it or don't agree with it, these are the rules, right? But at the same time, I don't want to be the heavy-handed dad. And so I'm trying to explain that to them. I'm trying to reason to them, why this is important. And I'm also trying to give in a little bit. We did get takeout food. Now, we came home and one person unbagged it, and we tried to do it as safely as possible. I did let my son go fishing, but I talked to all three of the people going and kind of got confirmation that they would be 10 feet apart at all times and no touching each other's fishing poles and things like that. So I've had to give in a little bit with reason. But it hasn't been easy, that's for sure, especially early. Now it's been a little bit easier. More of their friends are also doing it. But at first I felt like we were first and they were like, why are we doing this? And our friends don't have to, and it was hard. It was very emotional for my wife and I through that part, but we just stayed the course. It was something that was important to us. And I think ultimately my kids understood that we were doing it for the good of others, not for selfish reasons. And that helped them come to grips with it.
And I want to thank our KaiNexus Director of Marketing, Maggie Millard. She dug up the Mythbusters video link that you mentioned, Katie. So I've copied, I put that in the chat box for people to grab later. Maggie is also working from home with a child who we often see in the background. So hi to everyone else who is in that situation. Our CEO and co-founder, Dr. Greg Jacobson, is working at home with a child as well. But you're talking about learning new things like physical distancing, but then the learning in terms of formal classroom education continues. And so we had a lot of questions about this. One of them asked, what advice do you have for parents working from home trying to balance that with kids' schoolwork? This one person said, I'm finding it difficult to do both, to work full time and give enough attention to helping the kids get their lessons done. They have an 8th grader and a preschooler. And there were a lot of different versions of this question with different age groups. And I think we have that covered in our panel here. So thoughts on balancing both at the same time here, maybe not the exact same time, but balancing these.
I have given homebound instruction before for students who are out of school for medical reasons. Perhaps they had a surgery or they've had mono, and they may be out of school for a month or 6 weeks. And so our school division sends someone, a teacher, to their home to do that instruction. And what's interesting is that when we offer homebound services, it is not 35 hours a week. In fact, typically that one-on-one is going to be 10 hours a week. So how much time is spent on academic tasks? I think we need to be very realistic that you cannot set a schedule for your kids of 8 to 3 and expect that they are going to be engaged and normal during that time. So I would definitely say, first of all, amend the time. I've seen some homeschooling families say, you know what, elementary school kids need 2.5, 3 hours of academic work a day. Your high school kid can probably handle, 3 to 4 hours, maybe 5, depending on what they're doing. But I think the first thing is to release any expectation that you're going to teach them at this, the same hours that they would receive that instruction at school.
Yeah, I'd second that strongly, that I think trying to replicate what you remember about 4th grade or 6th grade or 8th grade at home is kind of a losing strategy. I had a sort of worksheet, which I'll share with you guys, that we used when we were homeschooling at the end of last year. And my fifth grader was doing about 2.5 hours a day. At the time, my first grader was doing an hour and a half a day of straight academic, pure academic work. But I think the other thing that that doesn't take into account is how educational just spending one-on-one time with a grown-up can be. So, for example, my daughter has been watching, a lot more YouTube shows and television than she would normally, but she's been retelling the story to me. So she watches a story, internalizes what happens, and then retells it. That's actually a pretty educational exercise for someone who's in at second grade. So it doesn't have to necessarily be formal educational work to help their development. The same way with cooking, the same way with, all kinds of household tasks, gardening, lots of things that the kids are doing with that time that's not straight educational time.
Yeah, I'll chime in quick. I actually, my two oldest kids started online school, one a year ago and one 6 months ago. So for them, it's a little bit of a new normal, but I'll tell you, just with their experiences, I would completely agree that thinking it's going to be the same as what you remember or the same as like when you're in school, it's just not. My daughter's pressure prompted, so she can certainly procrastinate an entire semester's worth of work and then get it all done at the end, and she makes great grades and does great with it. Whereas my son will kind of progress as the instructor wants them to throughout. And we've kind of taken the pressure off of both and just said, you have these results. It's your, go get them. I'm lucky that they're older in that regard. But like, for instance, my youngest daughter was watching a TED Talk. I'm a strong believer in you can learn to do just about anything on YouTube these days. And in fact, it might be a better way to learn. And so if she's watching a TED Talk, I don't care if she's doing a worksheet or like an assigned thing or whatever, as long as she's picking a topic and trying to educate herself about it. So my expectations have certainly come down, and that eases a little bit of pressure on it. I will say, I don't think the schools know what they're doing yet. I don't blame them. I know they don't. This is new for everyone. And so we're going to have to give them a little bit of time to figure out how to do this properly. And some patience and some grace and some helpfulness on that side. I love the tools of Zoom and Facebook Live and having the kids get together and do things with one another, even if they're playing games, that are somewhat educational. To me, those are just as important as if they do a worksheet or follow along a certain chapter in a book or what have you. I can't even imagine, though, with preschool and elementary school age children trying to keep their attention through this. I can't even imagine trying to go through that.
I guess the other thing I would say is, my husband and I have had an explicit conversation about our priorities during this. And basically what we agreed is that our number one priority is to preserve our physical health. Our second priority is to maintain everybody's psychological health, then our financial well-being and work situation, and then our education. Because I think, some of those things you can more easily remedy than others. And so when you have a set of priorities, it's a lens that you can look through to help you make decisions that are in line with those priorities. It just makes it, for us, it makes it a little easier.
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, sorry, Mark. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is the concept of identity. I saw it with my son. He's employed. He goes to home. He does online school so he can work, and he just got promoted at work. And then the place where he was at shut down, and so he lost his entire identity. Right? He now has lost this like kind of leader in a workplace identity. If your son or daughter made fantastic grades and they were looked at for that, I bet they're struggling right now. Like, I bet they've lost some of their identity of being one of the smart students in school or the funny kid in school and that sort of thing. And so some patience and some grace with the kids that they are losing their identity in addition to not being at school, I think is important. I think it's happening for everyone. It just, as adults, we see it in ourselves and we see it in others. Sometimes it's hard to realize that kids of all ages have that identity and it just got stolen from them a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I had a follow-up question for you because we've been working together a lot these last couple of weeks. Are there any specific strategies that you use for balancing things? Like, are you blocking off segments of time during the day, or just trying to roll with it as it's happening with what the kids need?
Yeah, I mean, luckily my kids are old enough to where they're pretty self-sufficient, so they feed themselves, they watch whatever they want. We're not a family that limits screen time. They just we manage their mental health, as the result. And if we need to pull screen time away, we do. But like at 5 o'clock, my daughter stands at the door with a volleyball in her hands, and she wants me to go practice with her. And I just can't say no at that point. If that means I have to work late at night, I have to work late at night. It just, those sort of things, I'm actually appreciating them and I'm liking that part of it, but it's certainly difficult to balance. From a work perspective, a number of the people that we work with have smaller children. And so we've had to be very patient with them on these video calls because it's really hard to keep the kids out of the room. They come in and they ask for things, and we've all had to just be very patient with that. And then also, sometimes they can only work in 15, 30-minute spurts before they have to go and spend time with their children. And so depending on the stage in life that people are and their age of their kids, we've had to make different adjustments for those people. Teenagers is an emotional challenge, but the younger kids, it's a time management challenge that parents are going through right now.
My sister worked from home when her son was young, and for a period of time, she had to make arrangements where she worked during his nap time, and so she worked it out with her boss where, he was an infant, so she would wake up early and work from, say, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., and then she would stop for a little bit to feed him or handle whatever. But then, during his periods of downtime, that was when she got her work done. And sometimes it meant some hours in the evening. And if you have an employer that will work with you with that flexibility, this is a great time to investigate some of those options.
Yep. I would also say to that end, like, if other parents and they have a small child, like having a Facebook play date at a certain hour so that they could work, or, there's got to be creative ideas that we could have to help one another out. It's so hard that you can't get the kids together to all play while one parent goes off and does something or runs an errand or whatever. But, there's got to be ways we could do some of that virtually.
Yeah, my 12-year-old has had a standing 7:30 story time with cousins who are 4 and 6 years old, but he picks out a book every night and reads it to them through Zoom, where he can screen share the image of the book. And it gives my sister, who's just maxed out, it gives her 30 minutes of the kids are occupied, they're joking around and having some social time, and maintaining that relationship.
Yep. I know we talked about Maggie, like her mom, her grandmother is playing Chutes and Ladders every day with her daughter. And so, one, it's great for them. They're developing a relationship and whatever. But Maggie gets to work and focus a little bit during that time, during the Chutes and Ladders time. So those kind of creative things are going to come up more and more often. But I would certainly tell people, think of your friends that are in different situations that you are, and there's creative ways that we can still minister to one another from afar.
Do you know, is that game, are they doing that through video chat with Chutes and Ladders?
Yeah. I don't know what they're using, which app, but there's some sort of a video involved. And Maggie said her daughter cheats a little bit and so she tends to win every time. But yeah, some kind of way they're using video and showing the board and that sort of thing to play those kinds of games. I think, parents and grandparents and older siblings could certainly help in that regard, not just within the immediate family, but outside of the immediate family.
We have using Game Pigeon, which is text-based. They're playing with their grandparents and their younger cousins and things. But that way they can play Uno and checkers and, sort of games everybody knows.
We have a local children's museum that is currently closed that normally does activities, and they're doing remote activities daily at a specified time. Our local library is doing children's read-alongs a couple times a day with the library staff, but those videos are often available after the live recording. And so if you need your kid, if you've got to do a quick call and you need to let them watch someone else read a children's book for 20 minutes, a lot of those resources are available.
And speaking of resources, just to give you all a breather for a second, we are going to share afterwards and on the blog post where this webinar recording will live, a whole list of resources, podcasts, social games, including Game Pigeon, tips about electronic book lending, setting up your kids' devices, all sorts of other resources. So thank you. I think we had contributions from both of you, Sarah and Katie. So thank you for that. We were talking about devices. There was one question that came in here. Is there such a thing as too much screen time when mom and dad have to work from home with a small child? Jeff, I thought, if I remember what you said, you're not really too concerned about it, but what do you all think about that?
I'm not concerned about it. As I said, my youngest is 10, and what I found the first few days especially was that the tweens and teens are actually processing a lot of this online, and in really, really interesting ways. They started, I started getting shared TikToks and things about social distancing. There's a really funny, there's some really funny spoofs out there on YouTube that people have done of different songs about quarantine time or whatnot. So, but the other thing is, like, if you let your kids get bored, their natural curiosity is going to guide them in some sort of direction. So I found myself a few days ago with my 10-year-old saying, "Hey mom, what's an essay? How do you pick a topic? How many paragraphs is it?" She may well write an essay. On the other hand, one evening, my 13-year-old decided to make herself some chocolate cake with some cake mix, but it turns out we were out of eggs. And one thing about kids is that not only is Google smarter than your parents, right, but always first answer is the right one. So when she was in the midst of this recipe and realized we didn't have any eggs because we needed to go to the grocery store, she ran a Google search and it told her that peanut butter is an acceptable substitute for eggs. We called this our science experiment. It did not work out well at all. But, their natural curiosity is going to lead them in some sort of direction, and we can foster that within safe boundaries, right? I'm not saying like leave all of the house paint out with your 4-year-old, but they will eventually start to look for something outside of the screen because they need that break.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have, as a family, we've had very little screen time up until 2 weeks ago. And so we don't have televisions in the house. We limited their time, and we've certainly loosened up on that. I will say for us, there a tool that's been very useful is a thing called Our Pact that allows us to, on their iPads, segregate the apps that are more educational in nature that we want them to have full-time access to, things for podcasts, playing chess remotely, all those types of things. And then the things that are pure gaming, which is also fine, but maybe we only want them to do that 3 hours a day. And so it's been a very helpful tool for us to set it up so that we're not physically taking away the iPad and they're still able to access messaging back and forth with their grandparents and that social components as well.
I'll tell you, one thing I have noticed through this is that just like you were saying, the right strategy isn't to remember how fourth grade was for you way back when. None of the kids I know, including my kids and their friends or anything like that, they're not reading the news articles and then getting depressed like the adults are, right? They're not going to sleep with a panic because they just read the worst news over and over and over again. They are online in a much different way. My son plays video games. Well, the video game makers or whatever, they open things up. So now if you're on Xbox, you can play with your friends on PlayStation or whatever. And so like my son's hanging out with his friends. That's how they consider hanging out right now. And it's it's made his social life active again. Now, I think it's crazy, but like that's the way they do it. But they never come down going like, oh, I read this article and this is going to happen. And, that's an adult thing. And that's something I think we project on kids from a screen time standpoint. They use it differently than we do for sure.
Right. We had another question here. Jeff, if you can speak to this, if you have, you mentioned stepkids, and if you have a split family with divorced parents and kids going back and forth, are there any kind of special strategies that you figured out or advice that you would have?
This one's the hardest one for me. My split family has essentially kind of decided to stay apart for the time being. So the kids are with us and they're not able to see their dad, unfortunately, during this time. He lives with someone who's an anesthesiologist and is going to be right in the throes of dealing with this crisis. And so, luckily they're old enough where emotionally that's not going to be a huge toll on everyone, but it's certainly difficult. The friends I have that are in split family divorce situations, I don't envy them at all because, one, we are all making decisions on what social distancing means for our family. You just said we're going to just stay within our unit and that's our decision. But if you're in a split family, you may not have that luxury, right? I mean, your kids may have to go see their mom or see their dad. And if the other family isn't as aggressive as you are, or maybe they're more aggressive and they want you to be as aggressive as they are, then that's going to cause some tension. The best advice I can give is to talk about it openly, honestly, and respectfully. I know that's probably hard for some families to do. It is, I don't know if there's a good solution. Most of the people I know that are in this situation, they are still transferring the kids back and forth. They're still sometime with the mom and sometime with the dad. And a lot of it is they're just kind of, I hate to say they're having to kind of get over their fears, but in some cases they are. They're having to. I don't know if there's a good strategy for solving that problem other than open communication. Do you guys have friends or any people that are kind of dealing with that? Yeah.
I have some friends, and it's bringing up a lot of trust issues with the other household that they're having to negotiate. And again, open communication is really important. If you have kids and even small kids can understand directions, when you've got a toddler and you can say, go pick that up or whatnot, kids are able to follow those instructions, but how much it's getting enforced is definitely coming up for them.
Yeah.
And I'll remind or again ask attendees, feel free to submit your own questions. Use the question box within the GoToWebinar control panel that's on your screen. We had another question that was submitted in advance, and it sounds like maybe this isn't an issue yet, but it might get to at some point. Do you have any ideas on how to keep every day new and exciting?
I'm a big fan of playlists. I am a huge fan of playlists. Even in my classroom, if my students are working, sometimes I'll just play some music. And so when we studied meteorology and we were talking about mercury barometers, I was like, oh, well, then of course we need to listen to Under Pressure from Queen because Freddie Mercury, right? And I tell my students all the time, you're here for science, but I'm throwing in cultural education for free and I'll just play some music. That has been helping. Today, my anthem is Stronger from Britney Spears. It was the quarantine anthem I didn't know that I needed, but apparently I need it. And then the video comes complete with a home workout, although I don't think I should do all those moves. But that is, kind of switching it up each day with some sort of song or celebration, laughing. We do a theme day, be like, oh, today we're going to wear nice clothes around the house. I don't know. Just something to break the monotony.
Yeah, we are definitely holding things in reserve in our house. Like when we order groceries, we'll order something that the kids like, but keep it off the table for a while for a desperate moment. Also, for younger kids, Go Noodle is a great resource for silly dance party and exercise in the house. Even for little toddlers, it's fun, silly music and things like that. So our kids like to do that as well. But yeah, I mean, it can feel like a slog. I talked to a good friend who's in China, and they've been on lockdown. Her child is still not back in school, but they were locked in their little tiny apartment with 5 people for a month and a half. And I was like, hey, I'm doing this webinar. Any tips for anybody? And she really enjoys cooking. And so she spent her time, making the day special with, cooking interesting things that she wouldn't normally cook. So I think everybody brings their different talents and interests, their creativity to bear on how to make life nice despite the circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do that before this issue. We had a routine, and some days felt like they blended into the other ones. Then we got to a weekend, and so I find this to be challenging. Although I kind of like what you said earlier. Sometimes the kids just got to get bored. Like, I'm certainly okay with hey, tough. We're in this situation, and go figure it out. You need to be the creative one in your own life to figure it out. That said, there are other times when, yes, we are trying to create that, I don't know, that excitement or the newness every day. One of the things that I've found helpful is my wife and I have quit trying to do it for all 3 kids. And so I don't know for anybody that has kind of, let's just say, multiple kids, but if all 3 of my kids really, really, really wanted a hamburger, and 2 of them said out loud that they wanted a hamburger, well, the third one would say, I'm not eating a hamburger. No matter what, we're not eating hamburgers, just to be contrarian. And so, that happens when we say, do you want to go for a walk? Do you guys want to go sit outside on the back porch? Do you want to play cards? There's just nothing that all 3 of them say, absolutely, that sounds great, let's do it. And so we've just kind of gotten over it. If one of them wants to do it, we do it with one of them, and then the other 2 will figure out something later, and they'll kind of come and be a part of that contact. So we haven't, I guess that would be perfect, being the enemy of good. I don't always need all 5 of them to do the same fun things, if you will. It's okay if they say, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out. I'm going to go upstairs and be by myself for a while.
Last night, and I don't know how you guys are handling bedtime, but ours has become very flexible. I mean, if my kids are up till 10:15, not a big deal. I mean, we are living the spring break summer life right now. But it was funny because last night, for whatever reason, I started playing, just some music on YouTube, and I was playing the Imperial March from Star Wars, and asked my kids to name the character. Well, next thing I knew, we were actually doing Star Wars themes, the different character themes off YouTube. I was just playing clips of them to see if my kids could name the characters. And they were very good at it. My daughters know a lot about the Star Wars characters. I was very happy they're being raised correctly. But obviously we may need to go visit episodes 1, 2, and 3 because they couldn't identify Padme's song. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities to take something small and make it fun. And, my girls got bored the other day and decided to try to play a game, and they were missing some of the game markers. So they picked up rocks,
figure it out, right?
Colored rubber bands on them, and they couldn't find a spinner for the game of life. They had a random number generator, and they started playing with it. And I was like, you know what? This is problem solving stuff.
Great.
I'm good with it.
Jeff, real quick, I got to put you on the spot. I can't help it. Katie just started talking about problem solving, or at least being adaptive. And Jeff, I'm curious, are there any continuous improvement practices that you've tried introducing to your family or to your kids?
I'm always that person, and then because of that, when I do things that are inefficient, like they are the first to call me out on it. Like, so where this has really come into play recently is when we take Amazon packages or we bring groceries home or something like that, no one really knows the right process, right? Like, can you touch it with your hand? Can you not? Do you have to wipe everything down? Do you spray everything afterward? You know, what's the right way to wash fruits and vegetables and all that sort of stuff? You know, everybody's just kind of figuring it out. But I kind of unpacked things in a batch, and they yelled at me about one piece flow and how I'm inefficient in the way I'm doing it. And so there's a lot of focus on that. I also put all my wires in an Amazon box because I tend to work, my office is outside, so I don't want to make a mess. And so they make fun of me about my Amazon box continuous improvement. But I've certainly started trying to ask them, like, how do we do that? Like, how do we look for these types of improvements? A lot of times it's at my own expense, though, because they like making fun of me with that sort of stuff. I can take it, though.
Yeah. I think we've heard examples from everybody, but Sarah or Katie, are there any other examples you haven't brought up yet, like new ways of doing daily tasks or creative ways that you've tried to improve? So it's just hour to hour operations in the home.
I think as far as shopping, which has been a point of stress, I think especially maybe for moms, you know, and feeling like, how am I going to make sure that my kids have milk or eggs or things like that? You know, we have really worked toward having a 2-week shopping list, and we'll put things that we want or need on a shared Google Keep, and shopping at the outlying grocery stores, you know, things that are 20 or 30 miles outside of Austin, the stock has been much better. The availability has been better. So just a strategy to try, because I do think that sense of not feeling like you might not have what you need for your kids is for a lot of people extremely anxiety provoking. Even though, you know, actual deprivation is not at our doorstep, it feels like it. And it's a new feeling for most of us.
Yeah, I mean, we are going with the flow. Actually, it's talking about a shopping list. It's been a lot easier. So many times I'd say, hey guys, I'm going to run to the store. Do you guys need anything? And no one would take that seriously, you know, and so they wouldn't give me things to buy. And then I'd get back, oh, you know, we're out of this, whatever. And this has been an opportunity to really reinforce, no, I need all of you to come in here, take an inventory, let me know if there's something that you want me to get, because this is the trip, right? And we're going to be making this trip. And I'm not running back to the store 10 minutes up the road because there was something else you wanted. So that's been helpful. I mean, I joked as we were getting ready for this webinar, I had a friend this morning, laundry's my big struggle, and asked me, you know, I guess you got all your laundry done. And I was like, no, I am not caught up on laundry. I saw a lot of my friends the first couple of days stress cleaning, and that's something that they needed to do. That was their coping mechanism. My perspective on it was, this is not a sprint. We are entering a marathon. I will have time to get things done, and it's okay to let things slide a little bit and to work on it as I'm ready. Because we are all coping. But I'll tell you, I did a Zoom meetup with my students this morning, my 8th graders. I invited all 120 of them. 45 got on the call, and we had so much fun. It was just a quick 20 minutes. Let's chat. Let's see each other. Want to tell you a few things that are available to you for instruction, but mainly, how are you? And they were trading gaming handles in the chat, and they were showing off their cat, their dog, whatever. So, you know, they are actually handling it much better. I actually put out a Google form of things that they could give me feedback or tell me how they're doing, including a scale 1 to 10. How are you today? Like, not good, or I'm doing great. Check the boxes that tell me how you're feeling. What are your feelings today? And as I'm starting to get some of that feedback, most of my kids are doing all right. I've got 1 or 2 that are really kind of down right now, and I can follow up with them. But I think they're handling this so much better than the adults are. as you said, like none of these kids are reading the news and then not sleeping. They're going with it.
I think one thing that's helped with our kids in terms of structure is to have a designated workspace for them, even if it's improvised in our house. And especially with all three of them have tried to make sure that faces out through a window, just because I think they're not spending quite as much time outdoors as they normally would. And I think having that spot that you go to work is not a thing that we had in our house previously. That helps them distinguish a little bit, like, okay, this is the time to be a little more serious and a little more focused. If someone's sitting there, that's not the time to interrupt them. Let your sibling work.
Well, I encouraged my students today to get outside this weekend. We're going to have a couple days of sunshine. We have a UV goggle sanitizer in the lab, in my science lab at school, and so we know that ultraviolet light does do some sanitizing, but these kids just need to go sit in the yard with a book and make some vitamin D right now. And as I said to them, like, I'm not telling you to go play rugby or go hug a lot of people, but you can certainly go outside and sit in the sunshine. You need it. So making sure that they are finding that time and that space to do that.
Yeah. Katie, do you have any advice for other teachers who are working from home right now?
So my school division is still in transition. As you said, a lot of school divisions are still figuring it out. This is a huge change for us. As I told my students, I don't believe my school division has shut down like this, or that school divisions across my state have done this probably since 1919. And back then they didn't have the internet, they didn't have Chromebooks, they didn't have Zoom meetings or whatnot. So this is a big change for all of us. Right now, my division is in enrichment activities, but next week we are moving to continuity of instruction. And so we'll be having some trainings and some meetings on Monday and Tuesday for that. It's been really helpful to connect with my students. And after doing that Zoom meeting this morning, some of the feedback I've received was, hey, tell Mr. So-and-so we want to have a Zoom meeting too. Like, they want to see us. So at this point, I am not grading things, which has been easier. My instruction has mainly been, here's some science-y things you can do. But I think as we move in that direction, I will have to set aside some time for specific grading or whatnot. I already use a lot of tools to streamline things. So I'm already using a lot of Google Forms and just online submission of stuff. We have the whole Google platform, which means that I'm not carrying 120 papers out of the building to grade in the evening, and just having them electronically submitted makes things a lot easier for me. So hopefully teachers will be able to adapt to some of those productivity tools and do that technological learning. I know it may be harder for some of our teachers who are not completely used to it. On the other hand, we have divisions where, access to internet is a big problem. So we're still awaiting state guidance on how much of this we can do, and what our expectations should be for those students who either can't afford internet or are living in areas where there is not access to internet.
I will say when we were homeschooling last year, one thing that was particularly useful was Cam Scanner, although I know there are competing products as well, but something that enables you to take multi-page written work and turn it into a single document. So you don't just have a series of photographs that you took with the iPad or something. I think that would be a tool for teachers particularly to keep that handwritten work a little more organized, particularly when you're talking about lower grades where they're not word processing as much.
I use CK12 for science instruction, and I've used it throughout the year, kind of as homework assignments, but it also includes PLIX, which are online simulations, lab simulations, things like that. So for secondary science, that has been a huge resource, and it's completely free for teachers. It's nonprofit, and it integrates with my Google Classroom, which is great.
One other thing maybe I'll invite the audience to do, if you've got any tips or advice of your own from your own experiences, you can share those. You can use the chat functionality in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you've got something you want to share and maybe ask it as a question, you can also use the question panel again for that. You've all shared some resources, and that was kind of maybe steer the conversation back to that. Are there other resources that you recommend in terms of podcasts, online resources, reading resources, anything else that you want to throw out there and kind of give a thumbs up to?
Yeah, this morning the daily podcast from the New York Times was all about questions from kids in quarantine, and they had children as young as 4 call and ask questions, and their health reporters answered it. It's age appropriate. There is so much science in there about cells and about just keeping ourselves healthy, that sort of thing. Everything from, can my dog get this virus? Is it going to give it to me? To, why can't I go to Chuck E. Cheese's right now? So huge shout out to the daily podcast, wherever you get your podcast. I would also say your local library. I know our library has a lot of electronic resources. They have audiobooks, they have ebooks, but they're also doing curbside. So my kids for a while now have been, as they finish a library book, they log into the computer, request the next book in the series, and then when we return the one they finish, the other one's sitting there waiting for them. And my local library is doing curbside now, where you can request things online, and when you pull up, they'll just set them in your trunk and you can keep going. So any of your local nonprofits, libraries, they are pushing this material out. One of our preschools is doing read-alongs and streaming on their Facebook page. One of our fire stations did a virtual fire trip, where they walked around the station, and that was really exciting, especially for small kids of an age where you traditionally do a field trip to the fire station. So there's a lot of creativity that's out there.
Yeah, Mo Willem, the children's book illustrator who does Piggy and Gerald, you guys probably have seen that he's doing a daily drawing instruction for kids that I know a lot of kids are kind of setting their clock by. And the tool for math that our kids use, but that I've introduced other families to as well, is Dreambox. And I know normally it's fairly expensive, but they're offering 90 days free right now, and is adaptive, but just has a really deep database. It is very helpful, and it goes from kindergarten all the way through early algebra, 8th grade. So it's a helpful thing, especially if your school district isn't able to do a lot of online math instruction yet. I would highly recommend it. The Kindle Unlimited has been helpful to us as well, although our library also does online lending, which we use a lot. But our library now, they can only lend so many copies of popular books, and so some things become unavailable. I think because people are catching on that it's a great resource. But Kindle Unlimited will, I think, gives you at least 30 days free, and after that it's $10 a month. But they have also a big database of books, including children's books.
Jeff, anything else that you want to kind of share or recommend?
No, I mean, as far as resources are concerned, I mean, I hate to say it, but with older kids, I mean, they kind of have their own resources. I mean, my kids can search YouTube better than I can, and like, my son's a good card thrower because he learned how to throw cards on YouTube, and so I think they're better than the adults are at figuring it out. I mean, to me, it's more along the lines of you got to point them in a direction of something that they can go learn and be excited about. But I just don't have to send them in the direction of resources at the age that they're at. They know it better than I do.
The one other thing I would add, my 10-year-old is getting guitar instruction from my 75-year-old uncle in Boston, but they've set up a time to Zoom, and he sits there with his guitar. So I think there are also resources within your own family somehow that we probably could have been utilizing all along, but this has driven us to realize it's there.
My niece turned 5 yesterday, and they're on a military base in Germany. So they're also pretty much shut down. But we scheduled a Google Hangouts, and all of the various cousins called in. So we had people calling in from New York City, from here in Virginia, and we quietly made arrangements that every household that was calling in would have candles. So when we were ready to sing, we all pulled out our candles and sang happy birthday, and then told her to blow them out. And it was a really special thing, that, you know, given our circumstances, we need to look for those special things. And it's really important that they make those connections, especially at a time where they may not be able to see their cousins or extended family.
We had one comment here shared by Tracy. She said their library is connected to Hoopla, where you can check out movies, books, and music, and they've increased the checkouts. Normally it's 6, but now you can get 12 items during this era. So Tracy, thank you for sharing that. Sarah, I was going to go back and just ask you to repeat the name of the author who's doing the drawing instruction, because I think your audio, at least for me, had cut out.
Yeah, Mo Willems. He's the author of the Piggy and Gerald and Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus children's books. Parents of small kids will be familiar.
Okay. So I've shared a couple other things in the chat box. One is the link for now. It's just a Google Doc that contains the questions and more importantly, the list of resources. And again, we'll publish that more formally on the blog. And then the other link I'm sharing here is the webinar that I mentioned earlier. This was a webinar with 2 doctors answering a lot of questions about COVID-19. If you go to that link, you can watch the video recording that was a similar format to this. You can listen to it as a podcast. And then Danielle from the KaiNexus team did a great job of putting together a text synopsis of the questions and answers for those who want to scan through that this way. Jeff, you're good at coming up with questions. Are there any other questions or topics that you think we should be?
I have one when you're ready.
Or Katie, go ahead. Katie. No, Katie.
You can go, Katie.
Okay, I want to address the disappointment that a lot of our kids are feeling right now, and a lot of families are feeling right now. I know my 13-year-old had just been selected as stage manager for a play that is maybe not going to happen at all. My 4th grader was the only 4th grader on her school's Math 2014 and had, you know, weekly meetings and whatnot with a competition coming up. I know a lot of people are calling off vacations and all sorts of plans, and it is fostering a lot of disappointment for our kids. The historic parallel I found, which I've been sharing, I shared with my actual children, and I've also shared with my students, is if you go back and look at the Stanley Cup in 1919, it lists 2 teams, and it says series not completed. And they called off the series that year for public health concerns with the 1918-1919 influenza. And what I've told both my students and my children is it had to be disappointing for those hockey players. It had to be disappointing for those fans. And we can feel that disappointment and acknowledge it, but also understand that that was a very brave decision. That was an incredibly brave decision. There is no telling how many lives were saved by that decision because, again, they were facing a public health pandemic, and this was the choice they made. And we are all doing this to be brave, and that it's all about public health and it's all about survival. So yes, I understand there are, you know, proms that people had ordered dresses for and
birthdays and
so many things. And it's okay to feel sad about those. It is 100% all right. And I would encourage parents to talk to their families and to talk to their kids about it. If that parallel of the Stanley Cup in 1919, if that helps illustrate things for you. I found that it's really, it's a powerful correlation to what we're dealing with now.
That's great. That's kind of in line with the identity loss that I was talking about earlier. A lot of it is just from disappointment that people are going through. I'll bring up a point that's been on my mind a lot. I don't know why I just call it the butter dish, but when you're on an airplane and those things come down, they tell you to put your own mask on first. And so I'm just going to say, as parents, like you have to have your mental health right first, right? So do what you can to get yourself right. It is not easy. Kids are demanding, and when they have mental health issues, you have to snap to action. But when you get a reprieve, get yourself, if that means to stop looking at your phone, to stop watching TV, to stop engaging with people who are, I hate to say it, but maybe potentially bringing you down at a certain point in time, like get yourself right so that way you can be there for others. Because otherwise then everyone suffers.
I think, and this is, not a happy topic for us, but I think the other conversation we have had as a family, and I think it's important for families to have, is what would we do as a family if one of us got sick? Like, what's our plan for handling that situation? And I think it's the equivalent to thinking through a fire drill. If the house caught fire, where are the exits? And so thinking about, okay, which bedroom would we use? Which bathroom would we use? Because I think it's very difficult to make those decisions when you're under stress. And so using the advantage of our relatively clear minds and calm situation right now to think through how to safely handle that, I think it's important. And unfortunately, I think the probability is many of us will end up
we'll have to go through it.
And so knowing how we're going to do that safeguards as many people as possible, I think is very important.
Agreed. Yeah. We're actually seeing that with someone down the block from us. Her freshman is dealing with it, and they've had to kind of quarantine her in a room. And so they're front and center. There are a lot of people who are going to have to deal with it. One of the things that I kind of use as just a mantra for me, and I've been trying to like beat the drum here, and it took me a bit because I got depressed last week and I had to snap myself out of it. But when all of this stuff goes down, we all have the choice of our reaction to it and our feelings about it. And gratefulness is, to me, the one emotion that if you can remember the things that you're grateful for and you can help people to understand the things that they should be grateful for, I think it helps. We are all sitting in nice houses going through a webinar through an electronic means that a lot of people just do not have in this world. And so no matter what happens, there are a lot of things that we can be grateful for. And if I can teach that lesson to my kids when it's hard, that's when the lesson really matters. It's easy to say it when things are going well and whatever, but when in times like this, when the stress is high, if you can remember to be grateful and you can teach your kids that lesson, I'm just a huge believer that those kinds of things will really matter from a parenting standpoint.
Yeah, I think our kids have also been encouraged by some of the things that we've seen with regard to the environment. The idea that there are dolphins back in the canals in Venice, or that we have monarch butterfly caterpillars for the first time in 3 years in our backyard. And maybe that's unrelated, but I think this idea that we can make big changes to our lives and that it can affect the trajectory of our society, that's an encouraging message. That's something that will be important long after this particular crisis has passed. And so I think they see some hope in that. And I do.
I also have challenged my kids, my students and my own children, of what are we going to do after, right? Let's plan a trip. If you could go somewhere after all this is over, money is no object, go out there and practice your latitude, longitude skills and map out a trip. Or, what's the first thing you would do? If we could go out tomorrow, what are the first things you would do? I've already warned all my introvert friends, I will be hugging them when this is over and they're going to have to deal with it, because that's hard for me right now. But it's really interesting to ask those questions of your kids and see what they say. Some of my students have responded with, I would absolutely go play basketball. First thing, I can't wait to go to the movies again, or I want to go back to my gym where I'm on the gymnastics team. So let them have that space and kind of daydream, because the goal is we're not here forever and ever and ever, right? Like, we need to survive this. We're going to get through this. Life is going to continue. So let's have fun.
Well, great. I think that's a great thought to end it on. We're here at the top of the hour. So thank you, everybody who tuned in, and we kept our audience for the hour. So thanks for that. Go to our panelists today for being so engaging and sharing so much with everybody. Thank you, Katie Webb Cyphert, Sara Evans, and Jeff Roussel. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Mark, thanks for hosting. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. Have a good weekend.